Tailwind V4 just dropped its beta, and it's so exciting that I convinced my parents to let me set up a recording studio in my dad's office so I can tell you all about it. This release is nuts. Everything from CSS standards to overhauling a lot of the stuff we use for variables to introducing Rust to the build chain. Yes, they rewrote the whole thing in Rust, at least I think. We'll be diving into all of this in just a second, but first, we have to hear from our sponsors.
Ever had some data you really wanted but just couldn't get? Like, sure, you can scroll through all the pages on the web yourself, but scraping it's just impossible. From rate limits to CAPTCHAs, it just feels like the web's fighting you when all you want is data. We've all been there. Well, us nerds at least. I can't even get the stats I want out of YouTube half the time, and that's why Bright Data exists. If it's public on the web, they can scrape it. Their API works with any stack. They get around blockers, CAPTCHAs, and everything else that might be holding you back. Whether you're scraping Reddit or monitoring e-commerce sites, Bright Data just kind of works. You don't have to take my word for it. Use my link, soydev.link/brightdata for a $15 credit on your account today. Thank you, Bright Data, for sponsoring today's video.
It is here. I've been waiting for a while. Tailwind V4 is, I think, almost inarguably the biggest overhaul of Tailwind to date. As they call it here, it's been 8 months since they initially open sourced the work they had been doing on Tailwind V4. Hundreds of hours of fixing bugs, soul-crushing backwards compatibility work, and troubleshooting Windows CI failures later, I'm excited to finally tag the first public beta release. As I talked about when we published our first alpha, Tailwind V4 is an all-new engine built for performance and designed for the modern web. One thing I'll call out before we go too far in is that built for performance does not mean anything about client-side performance. Something I think people miss a lot about Tailwind, and one of the reasons it's so cool, is it performs comically better than every single CSS and JS solution other than arguably StyleX, depending on things, but for the most part, StyleX will be literally perfect. It was built for that. But other than that, like most CSS solutions are going to struggle to compete with the performance you get from Tailwind because Tailwind introduces really consistent reusability with a small set of CSS that only grows to the size of what you're using from it and has a fixed cap for how big it can be. And once you send that CSS or inline it using something like the new Next.js inlining feature for CSS, which is really cool, by the way, you end up with what is effectively the ideal performance for styles in your app. It's actually really hard to beat the performance you can get from Tailwind with almost any other solution. And it's always annoying when people say Tailwind makes your HTML ugly and it's really slow. Because whether or not you think the HTML is ugly, it is objectively one of the fastest CSS solutions. Anyways, so when they say that it's built for performance, what they mean is builds. Builds are up to 5 times faster, and incremental builds are up to 100 times faster. To be fair, the builds were already really fast for me in almost all my projects, but knowing that they're that much faster is really, really cool. They also finally have a unified tool chain, which is nice because it was a lot of different parts. Remember when you had to install like post CSS and auto prefixer with Tailwind every time you installed it? That might be going away forever now. There's a unified tool chain, which has built-in import handling, vendor prefixing, and syntax transforms with no additional tooling required. It's also CSS-first configuration, which is really cool. You no longer have to do all your config in that weird Tailwind config.js file. A bunch of it can now be moved to CSS, which is where it belongs. It's style information. They also call out that it's designed for the modern web. It's built on native cascade layers, wide gamut colors, and includes first-class support for modern CSS features like container queries, @starting style, popovers, and more. There's so much more to say, but everything you need to get started is in the new beta docs. And oh boy, what docs they are. There's a lot of cool info in here. They do call out this is a preview, and this is a bold preview. When I tried the alpha 8 months ago, it didn't work on like any of my existing apps, but hopefully it's a bit closer. We'll probably try adding this to an app when we get to the end here, but I want to read through this all first. As they say, there are some rough edges and things they want to improve, but we're confident that we're not going to make any more breaking changes between now and the stable release. Hopefully some unbreaking changes. Good point, Ethan. I love taking my type-safe config and making it, CSS. Very fair point. Interesting. If you're using post CSS still with something like Next, you have to install their post CSS plugin now instead. And just to be clear, @next here isn't @next.js. @next here is the future version that they have tagged on npm. But with something like Vite, which doesn't prescribe a specific way of processing CSS, you can just install the latest Tailwind, although you still have to install their Vite plugin. This is a nice change. You don't have to import like 15 things like you used to have to. Excited for that. They even have their own dedicated CLI. Best on if the CLI is written in Rust or JavaScript. I'm thinking JavaScript, but it could go either way. Packages, CLI. Looking like I called it. This does show an important detail I was hoping to get to, though, Lightning. For those who don't obsess over everything going on in CSS, I understand. But for those who have, you probably already know about Lightning. It's an insanely fast tool chain for parsing and processing CSS and getting it all minified and handled for you. It's written in Rust in order to get your CSS parsed way quicker. It can minify 2.7 million lines of code per second on a single thread. It's kind of nuts. Going from CSS Nano, which took half a second, their test was minifying Bootstrap 4, took half a second on CSS Nano, almost 18 milliseconds on ES Build, and Lightning is literally 4. So I bring this up because Tailwind is using Lightning CSS in this new version, which allows it to be hilariously faster. And it's not just Lightning they're relying on. That's like one part of the toolchain. They still have to parse all of your files in order to figure out what class names you're using so they can make the right CSS. But combining all of these Rust file management tools together, the result is actually really, really fast. One cool thing they did that I didn't expect is this upgrade command, where you can tell it to upgrade a whole repo by calling npx tailwind add upgrade. Yeah, this is cool. More and more tools are introducing this with their big overhauls. Like Next.js just added a CLI to run your upgrade to the latest Next release. I know things like Clerk have been having these for a bit. I know a lot of tools have introduced these code mods to help you with the upgrades. Really cool to see Tailwind including it. Shall we try this on a small-ish project? Okay, I have the project open. For those who don't know, the project is QuickPick, my little weirdly viral image app. Don't tell me they don't have a copy button for this. Come on, Tailwind. Need to get my CTO Mark, the click to copy expert, to help out here. We'll run this. Linked the Tailwind config to the source app global. Migrated. Let's see what happens. Huh. I think it just worked. I think it literally just behaved. What has it changed here? Okay, look at the before and after. Outline none. Outline hidden. Okay, so they changed the name for that. Oh, flex grows now grow. I don't love that. So I've heard an argument from the only person I trust to go anti-Tailwind, which is our friend Naman, who's the creator of StyleX. One of his arguments against Tailwind, it's a simple one, but it hurts the performance quite a bit, is that since not all classes have a prefix, you have to do a lot of weird checking in something like Tailwind merge. Because if you have a component that has a default like background color red, and you pass it class names that include background color purple, you want that to override the class name that was already applied to the element. But in order to deal with that, in order to find that diff in software on the client side, you have to check all of the things that could potentially overlap. And if they all have the same prefix, it's relatively easy to do that. If they don't all have the same prefix, like flex or none or grid, you now have to have special cases to handle these special words that make it way slower than it has to be. If everything had a prefix and all of the prefixes matched overrides, you wouldn't have to have that code be as slow. And it's not super slow, but it could be way faster. But because Tailwind has these one-line shorthands, it can't be as fast as it theoretically could be. Just an interesting call out. It's weird to see them going the other direction where they're killing prefixes instead of adding them to everything. Results are nice and clean though. Flex, grow. And now here's where the main change happens, the global CSS, because this is now where a lot of behaviors are described. The default border color has changed to current color in Tailwind V4. So we've added these compatibility styles to make sure everything still looks the same as it did with V3. If we ever want to remove these styles, we need to add explicit border color utilities to any element that depend on the defaults. Interesting. Very interesting. Since we had these elements that didn't have a border color set, Tailwind added a default layer here in order to maintain the old behavior. It's actually kind of cool. I think it's dope that they set this up this way. I like that they're using the util to move backwards compatibility stuff to one place too. It's actually nice because if you have like 20 of these, having them all in one place as like an indicator of what needs to be ported it's really good. I hate when an update tool hot fixes what's wrong in all the different places it existed. By putting it in one place, we kind of have a checklist top to bottom of what we need to change to do things right. And that's a really good thing. I like it when you get to work this way. You have the exact order of events you have to follow to go clean stuff up. And when I did migrations at Twitch on the giant code base where we started moving things to new patterns with Apollo v3 or we started introducing hooks, having a single place or document that lists everything that's out of date is really, really helpful. And I like that they kind of built that intentionally or not by putting everything in the global CSS here for those overrides. What do we got in the rest of these? It's all going to be just that flex grow change because I know all of these tools have one of those in it. This one's going to be the outline hidden, yeah. None of these are surprising. It's cool they made all those changes for me and that the result just works. Is there no Tailwind config at all anymore? Is the file just gone? Yeah, that's kind of wild. That's interesting. I have feelings. I don't think we had any plugins, but now I'm curious how the plugins work. Okay, I'm supposed to be looking for the plugins right now, but configuring dark mode is actually really cool. You set up a variant dark and you specify where .dark is true. So as long as you put that on body, everything underneath is going to be dark mode now. It's really nice that this is so much more declarative. I feel like I actually understand it and it's less weird Tailwindisms and more real. Here's another cool thing. You can define a prefix, again, in CSS. Still weird, still pretty cool though. Using plugins. At plugin directive. Interesting. Very interesting. I would never have guessed at plugin would be something I write in CSS. I almost want to get one of those screenshots where I show a CSS file in this new way and see how much it breaks people's brains. Should we move all config to CSS? Should somebody file a PR to Next.js so that my next config can be a CSS file too? Imagine turning on React compiler via a CSS plugin in, oh no, that's too cursed. Even joking, that's too cursed. Actually, no, Ethan, ignore me. Please don't do this. You know too much on the inside of Next. Don't waste your time. Or do, I won't stop you. Let's go back to what's actually new though. I've been trolling around too much. As they said before, it's a ground up rewrite of the framework, taking everything that they've learned about the architecture over the years and optimizing it to be as fast as possible. Part of me feels weird about this because it doesn't solve a lot of the problems that cause actual client-side performance issues with Tailwind, specifically Tailwind merge and class variance authority type stuff. I would have hoped they would pull those things in, but those aren't used by every Tailwind user. The Tailwind CLI and the Tailwind bundler is used by every Tailwind user. So I get why they chose this focus, but I would have liked them to start including more of the utils we all need to use in order to use Tailwind, because they might have noticed different wins that they can't see because they don't own that whole pipeline. They only own the transformer to go from Tailwind code in our DOM to Tailwind CSS. Oh God, the person with the app plugin handle. Poor at apply is about to have a lot of friends. They call out that they've seen up to 8 times faster incremental builds and 3.5x faster cold starts. The most impressive improvement is on incremental builds that don't actually need to compile any new CSS. These builds are over 100 times faster and they complete in microseconds. And the longer you work on a project, the more of these builds you tend to run into because you're just using classes that you've already used before, like flex, call and span 2, font bold. That's actually a cool thing I hadn't thought of. Most of the time when you're writing code that uses Tailwind, you're not introducing a class name that's not already used somewhere in your project. And now those changes take microseconds. I hadn't even thought of that. That is huge. Going from 35 milliseconds to 192 microseconds that's kind of nuts. Not that like when you save, this stuff is slow. So if I go in and save something in here, like SVG tool, compiled in 133 milliseconds. Let me change something in it so it's a little slower. Okay, 105 to 130 milliseconds seems to be the range. Let's go back to the old version of Tailwind. Not going to lie, it works well enough. I'm going to put that on a branch so that we can merge it after if it does come out well. Cool. Now we're running dev again with the Tailwind V3 edition. And if I save a change, let's make an actual change. We'll change the shadow to large. Well, that's not a good sign. Maybe I need to open up that specific tool. Okay, there we go. That's closer to what we were seeing before. That said, it's worse, or it's better. Like, going to the old version seems to be slightly better on average, which is kind of funny. Good points, chat. I should have thought of that before. Since it's using post CSS still, it is going to be slower than if it was using Vite. Very good point that I hadn't considered before. Yeah, hopefully since Next is already committed really hard to Tailwind, they'll add something that uses Lightning CSS instead of post CSS in that layer. That's how it's supposed to be pronounced, yes. Sorry, Vite's one of the few things I actually pronounce correctly. They've changed how it's supposed to be pronounced before, much like Dino, which used to be Deno. It was Vite, but Vite is correct now. Zustand, I will never agree to pronounce correctly. I'm too American to pronounce a German word. They lost the war. I don't have to respect their pronunciations. Yeah, other big thing as we saw was the CSS config. It is cool you can define a whole theme this way with like your default fonts, breakpoints for different sizes, and theme variables, which is really cool too. You can define does it show? Yeah, so the different themes would be layers. So you can define @layer theme, which has these properties, @layer base with these properties, @layer utilities with even more. And then you can specify even crazy behaviors like what to do on certain hover things when different themes are being applied. And now you can use these different layers to affect different things in different places. Oh, that's huge. The amount of hell I've spent trying to config content properly so that Tailwind actually knows where it should be going to parse things, that just being built in is going to be a really nice change. Very good call. This is going to kill some things that rely on analyzing build in order to generate stuff because you'll always ignore your build. But the idea of gitignore being used as a heuristic for what to and not to parse is a smart decision that should have been made a while ago. Also interesting that you can specify certain sources that you do want to include. If you do have like a library you want to be parsing the Tailwind from. Yeah, you no longer need post CSS import because that's all handled with their layer. I wonder, since they can't use Lightning in the next version, if that will still be necessary for the next JS builds. And as I mentioned before, no more auto prefixer, post CSS preset environment, all just part of Lightning CSS. Oh, apparently TurboPack already uses Lightning CSS. That's cool. That might also be why we're seeing similar performance between the Tailwind V4 and the V3 version, because they're already hacking Lightning CSS around it. Interesting. I don't know enough about how TurboPack's optimizations are going to conflict with Tailwind's. All I know is that it's really, really fast for the code bases I'm in. If it's under 100 milliseconds for me to see the new version of a page, I don't care. Even if it's under 300, I'm probably fine. What's React? Never heard of it. Interesting that they opened up things like grid column to let you put arbitrary values. That's a little scary. Previously, all arbitrary values were bracketed or defined in your config. Now they just kind of happen. I'm a little scared that's going to conflict with the like single config nature and like the one way of doing things way of Tailwind, but I could see this working out. Oh shit, data dash stuff automatically handled. That is actually kind of nice. It is a little scary because every time you do one of these, it's unique some amount. So this will result in a more of those unique class names in your code base. It kind of conflicts the thing I was saying earlier, where you have a very limited top line number of classes that can exist in your code base with Tailwind. This will increase the number. If you have lots of different elements that have lots of different data dash properties, and then you apply different subclasses with this, every single one of those is now creating a new class name. And yes, Rav, to answer your question, something like H54 could now just exist by default. I am curious, if we try that, will it do it? So if I set some random element on this page, here, this button, sure, we'll do H54. It's looking very likely that this will work. Let me grab an SVG and drop it. Yep, that works. V4, you can just put whatever number you want and it will interpolate it as something valid. I don't think the VS Code extension has updated yet to have the hover behavior, which is a little annoying, but it is cool that you can do that. A little scary because it takes away one of the cool things that Tailwind does, which is it makes all your sizes kind of fit together because they're all scaled reasonably well. But now you can do weird values. Like I already see people in chat doing like 12.5. That's scary. Test if it does decimals. Oh no. Oh no. H12 point. We'll do a fun, annoying one. 12.4. It is red underlining that, which is hopefully a good sign that it won't do it. We'll see if it behaves with 12.5. Okay, it does with 12.5. If it's a 0.5, it will. Otherwise, it won't, it looks like. Is that for real? Yeah, that is. If I change that to 12.8. Yeah, that's fun. It has to be a 0.5, but it works for that. So you're definitely going to make slightly more cursed than previously CSS. Fun. Did not think they would do that, but here we are. So that's the arbitrary values. I'm surprised that they let you get as arbitrary as they do. Interesting. They have arbitrary spacing, which is really cool. You can change how big the spacing is for those multiples, which is fun. You can even provide your own explicit scale, which is interesting. I have not seen anybody do that, and I would be scared if they did. Moving to OKLCH is huge, by the way. RGB should be treated as dead. We need more wider spectrum. HDR is not the future anymore. HDR is today, even if my videos are still SDR. And an HDR future requires more control. Good stuff. Simplified variable colors. Oh yeah, for if you specify a variable for error in primary color instead of it just being specific, like BG-red/400, having defaults as variables, you just put an @ theme. And it's really cool that you can just do that. And now all of your Tailwind like class names will autocomplete correctly. The VS Code extension will work correctly. Having that all that simple in one place is actually huge. This is going to make ShadCN so much simpler, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. It's going to be a lot of work to move ShadCN over to this, but it'll work great once they do it. Oh, that's kind of cool. At min and at max, so you can specify when a class name kicks in. Instead of it being, because like I've seen so many times where you say hidden and then MD:show. This inverses it. So you say max MD:hidden, then everything else is handled by default. That's actually a lot cleaner. I like this a lot. This might be my favorite thing thus far, actually. 3D transforms. Oh my God. Tailwind finally supports a third dimension. Unironically kind of cool. Like the code, I know what this is going to be. It's like on hover, it's going to rotate one of the dimensions to make that work. Yeah. Yeah, hover, translate Y4, rotate X49, Z38. The fact that you can apply hovers within 3D space on an element, that's That's really cool, actually. I'm working on a game right now that I might actually use that for. Okay. You have my attention, Tailwind team. Oh, linear gradients let you do angles, no more weird transformations to change the angle? Okay, finally. Everybody's freaking like clone of linear is going to look slightly cooler now. Radial gradients are actually really nice. Conic is useless. I've never seen a conal gradient that looked anything other than cringe, but a radial one like that looks stunning. That I could actually see being useful. Inset shadows. Yes. Inset is so good. This is so good. We should have started here. This is what I'm here for. This is an auto resizing field. So I'm gonna put down the mic and type. Nice. That's cool. Field sizing content is just one class that lets the field expand when you use more things in it. Also, fixed as an option to tell the browser to not do that. So I talked about this before. One of the things I use Tailwind for the most is even in a project, not using Tailwind. I often use the Tailwind docs more than projects with Tailwind. So I go to the Tailwind docs to see what a class I use all the time does and grab the 1 to 3 lines of CSS to throw into this other project. These classes are really useful, not just because I'm going to use them in Tailwind a lot, but when I'm not in Tailwind, I can go grab the 3 lines because they're annoying and then use them other places. I use the Tailwind color page so often it's not even funny. Oh, and for the question, is there a default Mac keybind to delete last word? Yeah, I think it's option delete. Yeah, I use that all the time. I don't even think about what it is. I've modified like my terminal and my IDE and things forever so that the default Mac OS text 1 word delete keybind works everywhere because I use option delete more than I probably use the normal delete key now I think about it. Grim, there's actually a good idea. I would use a Raycast plugin to automatically lorem ipsum. That would be super dope. I wish Shad CNUI uses already because I want to use it in a prod environment already. Yeah, honestly, same. Color scheme utilities. Look at that. Scheme light, scheme dark. Built in. Finally. Font stretch. Oh shit. I'm actually going to use this. There are so many random places where I want this particular look, especially the condensed look. Oh, this is really good. This is really good. I am getting more and more hyped as I scroll. Composable variants. Group has data potato, opacity 100. Now, if anything in the group has that property, this will have that. Very interesting. I see this being used for some cursed shit, but I could also see this being used to clean up some existing cursed shit. Starting style variant. That's so that you can have a popover that like flows in like that. Shit. I'm going to go add this to pick thing because right now I have it with a generic transition and a lot of random cases trigger it. If this was just starting, so it only happens when it's first rendered and never again, oh, that'll be real nice. Not. How is this not a thing before? Pun not intended. Not variants are huge. God, that's going to be so fun. I'm going to use that a ton, actually. The more we scroll, the more useful these things feel to me. I have no idea what a nerd is, so we're going to skip that. Oh, it's not interactive. That makes sense. And you have special styles for when it's inert. Don't know how common that's going to be, but it's cool it exists. Nth child, nth last child, nth last 5 underline. This is scary. I see this being more cursed than useful, but if it's useful to you, cool. In. Okay, that's actually really useful to say this is inside of something that's being focused. Woo. Super handy. Pop over open. Okay, I see that being very useful. Descendant variant. Oh, what? I didn't know about this. That's very useful. You just put a star and it applies to all the children. What are you doing to it, though? All descendants. I want to combine it with another variant. So if you want to target all sub-elements that are data avatar. Okay, I see where you're going. I see what you're cooking here. Weird, but potentially very, very useful. You can even import a legacy config if you still want to use it for some reason, but it just rewrote mine for me with no issue. This is a lot better. If you're writing custom utilities, this syntax always sucked, and now it's not going to. That'll be a very nice change. I think that's everything I want to riff on here, though. There's a lot of cool stuff. I'm excited. That's all I have to say about Tailwind V4. I am genuinely way more hyped than I expected to be, and I hope you guys are too. Let me know what you think and if it works on your projects. And until next time, peace, nerds.